G'day guys, welcome to Walking Boxing. Friday, January the 3rd, 2025. So almost said 24, but it's 25. And a lot better day today it is. It's absolutely beautiful here in the Macedon Ranges. A little bit warm, so Neil has just stopped for a bit of a drink at the moment. It's really good. There's a little stream that's about halfway, and he likes to stop and get a drink there and recharge, and probably no doubt at some stage you'll want to have a lie down, being it's a little bit warmer. But thanks to everyone yesterday for the comments on the video on the Carlton year I had there, or the year at Carlton. And as always, when it comes to football, as always, it sparks the emotions, doesn't it? And there was a lot that liked the story. I think most people actually liked the story, but took great pleasure in reminding me there was 30 years in between premierships and my team shit, all that sort of stuff. But hey, you put yourself out there in these situations, well, you're going to get that, aren't you? You can't have it both ways. There's a couple reminded me about some past battles. I love when people say, oh, I'm still trying to get over the 99 prelim where you just beat us by a point and put us out of the grand final. Wow. In 30 years of heartache for the Blues, or no premierships, that still is a highlight of I think most Carlton supporters' lives. But anyway, it's almost a little bit sad though. That was it's just over 25 years ago, and we're still talking about it. Like, that's our one highlight. It's pretty sad when you think about it. But anyway, I was over the journey in the last few years, getting back on the proper boxing session subject today, by the way. But I always get asked over the journey in the last 3 or 4 years of, what's wrong with boxing? What can we do to improve boxing? Oh, geez. It's the eternal question, isn't it? Look, I suppose looking at it, closely now, boxing hasn't been this healthy for a long time. Look at the world scene. It's been dominated by one promoter, of course, in Turki Alalshikh, along with, in conjunction with Oscar De La Hoya and Eddie Hearn, and Bob Arum's had a go as well. Then you've got, that's the positive. Here in Australia, it's been fantastic, with so much competition amongst the promoters now, and the shows are really gone up a few cogs, and the development of the fighters is there. Do you look at things like outside the ring again, such as the sanctioning bodies? Well, that's an eternal question too. You look at the events themselves, what can be made to make the events better, and of course things like the grassroots in boxing, and how do we make that better and make better fighters. There's all these different things. Then of course there's the broadcasting there, which is really going to be an integral part of the sport's, I suppose, profile going forward. And that's a very, very important one, because it doesn't matter how good your boxers are and the events you're putting on, if the TV networks aren't getting behind it, well, we're in big trouble, aren't we? And I think we all as boxing fans tend to also compare boxing to UFC. I think that's probably the first thing I would say, is not to compare boxing to UFC. It's a whole different model. It really is. I know it's like, well, hang on, it's a combat sports event in an arena on TV. How can it be different? But it just is. I think, first of all, the followers and the supporters of UFC are just totally different to boxing fans. They view it differently, and we'll get to that anyway, because I know it's always been about, why can't we get crowds early to the shows? UFC do it. How come boxing promoters don't do it? Well, I'll get to that. But I suppose probably the first thing that I suppose we could look at is outside the ring, and things like the sanctioning bodies. Well, actually, we'll start with the sanctioning bodies. I was going to start with grassroots, but let's just start with sanctioning bodies. I don't know. As long as it's controlled by money, which it is, as long as it's controlled by power-hungry people, which it is, and as long as it's pretty much ratings are decided by relationships and loyalty and all this sort of stuff, which it is, I don't think it's going to get any better. I think unless we get, and I don't want to sort of lean on someone like a Turki Alalshikh to bring these people together, but maybe he's the only hope of it. Maybe, does he buy the sanctioning bodies and merge them into one? That's a possibility. But look, the thing is, what happens with them, and you go to the conventions over there, and you petition for rankings. How does that work? That is just ridiculous. Where you get up and plead your case, and if they like what you have to say, they will just elevate you on the spot. That's not right. That's not right. You might be ranked number 15 in the world, or whatever, or 20, whatever it might be. And if you've got a good negotiator who turns up at, say, the WBC convention and says, well, my fighter's done this and done that, and I'll request this and request that, they can elevate him to the number 5 spot without even him having to fight for it. Now, that is ridiculous. We have fighters that are ranked number 1 by one sanctioning body and not even in the top 15 of the other 3. I mean, how does that work? Well, we know how it works, but it is wrong. So whether it's Turki Alalshikh, maybe it's the Ring magazine, that is sort of recognised as the one, but unfortunately, as much as we hate to think about it, it's universally regarded as number 1 or the best or the champion, but at the end of the day, it is not a proper belt. It's not a sanctioning body belt. It is a magazine. I've had this argument many times. I agree with you that it's the best representation of a champion, but at the end of the day, it is a belt given out by a magazine. I'm sorry, but that is fact, even though it is the universally recognised champion. So I'm not sure a magazine can be the actual belt. We've still got those sanctioning bodies. They've had record years, the sanctioning bodies, as far as sanctioning fees and all this sort of stuff. And that's obviously in conjunction with a lot of the purses that they've been getting in Saudi Arabia. But geez, as long as it's controlled by that and the money, and it seems to be the leadership is passed down through families and stuff, isn't it? So as long as that happens, it's still going to be the same. Till we get like almost an outside source to be the CEO, whatever it is, of these companies and run them like a company, not just almost like a cartel, then that's going to be the major problem outside the ring. I mean, as far as Grassroots goes, I don't think it's too bad at the moment. I think participation numbers have never been higher throughout the world. So the problem is if the Olympics drops boxing, does that affect it at all? I don't think it will. I think most young fighters see the amateurs as a pathway to the pros anyway. They all want to be world champions. So I don't think there's much more that can be done. I think the camps and programs and all that sort of stuff that the amateur bodies have in place around the world, I think are pretty good. I think the standard of boxing at amateur level is outstanding. And and look, we've always had competition outside the ring as far as other sports goes. So I don't think that's really going to change. So I don't think there's much more they can do with Grassroots. I mean, I could have a standalone episode on what I think the amateur bodies sort of could do differently or better, but it's just my opinion. I think overall we're getting the results that we're after. The right fighters are going to the big tournaments, the right fighters are winning the tournaments, the right fighters are turning pro and doing well. So I don't think there's much more we can do at the grassroots level. I think everyone does that pretty well. But I mean, apart from that, and when you get to the pros, the promoters getting behind the fighters, I don't know. I don't think anything's ever been any different and will ever be any different. I think the promoters only want bankable fighters they can really build on, fighters they can get behind, fighters that are crowd pleasers who possibly might be world champions or Australian champions or whatever it might be, and they'll get behind those fighters. Unfortunately, that's what undercards exist for, guys, and I think nothing will change there. So I don't think there's more that promoters can do, because at the end of the day, you've got to remember, it's a business for them. It's not a charity. And I know you could probably say, well, if it's a business, you invest at the ground level and you build them up, and they do that to some extent, but they want to do it on bankable fighters and almost a sure thing. Very rarely will you just get them to just sort of take a chance because they like the guy or whatever it might be. So you'll find that they might chuck them on an undercard here or there, but unless, as I said, they're bankable or marketable or a sure thing, I don't think much will change there. I think they'll just continue to put these guys on undercards and get behind the real legitimate prospects out there, and that will be the same. But again, I don't think there's anything wrong with that at the moment. I think the undercards are stacked. You've got fighters lining up to be on them. I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I suppose the problem is when we get to the actual top level, that's probably where the issues start. And sorry, just backtracking as well a bit. I know, like even here in Australia, I was asked this the other night. There's a guy here, I can't remember, his Fred Zawara or something. Why can't he get on cards? And why won't people fight him? Well, because he's risky. and doesn't sell tickets and this sort of stuff, and that's probably the question or problem for domestic level. But again, it's never been any different, and I doubt it will ever be the same until the networks come out and they give, say, a promoter like $200,000 to put on just a local show, which is probably not going to happen, because then they don't really care about whether the fighters can sell tickets. It's just, hey, we'll get behind some of the good guys, put them on, and that's probably the only way that gets fixed, is if there's no budget constraints. They don't have to worry about selling tickets because the event's covered and they're going to make money. So, but anyway, on to the top stuff. And the only thing I'm worried about at the moment, I'm happy about it, but also worried about it. It's great that Turki Alalshikh has pretty much taken over boxing and is doing his thing, and we've got all those big shows and big fights and big events. The problem I've got is at the moment, or the fear, I suppose you would call it, is that the promoters, I think, are getting lazy. The other promoters are getting lazy. It's just, they're all just trying to jump on Turki Alalshikh. He's doing all the work. He's putting up all the money. And the Oscars and Eddie, I mean, I don't mind Eddie because he got on right at the start. Oscar's been the one that's jumped on a little bit later. But the fear, I'm not saying they are lazy. I've just got a fear they will get lazy. And I think they are getting lazier per each show, because, as I said, Turki Alalshikh's just doing all the work. So my fear with that is that if Turki Alalshikh's interest drops off, or the money dries up, or whatever it might be, what happens then? These guys are going to have to go. I think they would adjust. But at the moment, I think they're all a little bit comfortable. All the boots are pretty full, I suppose. And I'm just not sure what would happen if he dropped it. But as I said, I think boxing's been around long enough that they'll find a way. So let's go to some of the other things that these contributors had to say. What have we got there? Focus on undercard bouts that hold consequence. Oh, I went through that, didn't I? Yep. Okay. All right. Someone else said, actually, just on that too, on the undercard bouts, there's the question or the comments about, well, UFC get a stack of people there early from the first fight till the last fight, whereas boxing is pretty much the co-main event before you'll get a crowd. And I think that's, again, just the way boxing is to the UFC, because you've got to remember, the UFC promote the card. Yes, they'll have a main event, but they promote the card. It's UFC 157 or whatever the hell it is. They promote the event. And yes, they stack it, and it's a great card, but they promote the card, whereas boxing just tends to promote just one fight. That's why they only get a certain amount of people there until the main event. And I don't think that's going to change. Not just, again, I think boxing fans have been conditioned over the years to go to boxing for one fight, the main event. Whereas UFC, it's all about, it's almost a WWE type of model. And that's why I don't think we get that many people there early. I mean, I was at a great event earlier in the year when Tim Tszyu fought Sebastian Fundora at T-Mobile Arena. Started with Sergey Bowerchuk and Brian Mendoza just to get things going. We had Lara and Zarafa, we had Pitbull and Rolly, and then Tszyu and Fundora. I mean, what a card that is. And I think there might have been the little fellas thrown in there as well. So a great card. And I sat there and it was deserted up until Pitbull Cruz fought. And then after the fight, it was deserted again. By the time that Tim took the stage, got into the ring with Fundora, it was half empty, the stadium. So the fight fans will just go to the fight they want to see. And it just so happened that night that Rolly and Pitbull was probably the fight that everyone wanted to see. Hence why it was full when it was on and empty when it was over. So that's why I think we're being conditioned. I'm not sure whether there's much we can do about that unless we start doing the numbered type of events like they do in UFC. And we're sort of getting that at the moment with the Riyadh season shows, aren't we? I mean, they've got these X amount of shows per year and they stack them top to bottom. But again, it's just the one real main event that's being promoted. So I don't know how to fix that. I mean, that's up to the promoters and the TV networks. Maybe it's just less fights. Better fights, but just less fights. One thing I do like, though, is talk about like a 9 o'clock curfew as far as the main event goes. I love that. Why are we sitting there till 11 o'clock at night or 11:30 and sometimes later for the main event? That's probably a broadcasting issue. So why are we doing that? So that's probably one thing I like, have a set set time for 9 o'clock and work our way backwards. I mean, these are all just little things, I suppose. Still on the broadcasting networks, probably one thing I would like to see with that is that more networks or streaming networks get involved, but they air them free. So what I mean by that at the moment, I think mainstream TV is dusted. I think it hasn't been part of mainstream TV here in Australia for as long as I can remember, probably 30 years, 40 years. I know they're sort of involved now with things like 7plus and that sort of stuff, but I'm not sure whether it's got longevity long term. I would like to see Netflix get involved more heavily. I thought even though the Tyson and Paul fight had its hiccups, I think overall they put regular fight nights on and invest in fights like they do in movies and docu-series and all that sort of stuff. I think that would be awesome, and I'd like to see a promoter hook up with them. Of course, you've got the usuals in DAZN and all that, the ones that are always going to be there, but I would love to see the top ranks. I know there's talk they might go to DAZN, but like promoters all over the world linking up with the Netflixes and Binges and is it Hulus and Stands and all that sort of stuff. I know Stan is sort of doing that at the moment, but all free. Have your big pay-per-views and that's okay, but have regular shows like 7plus have done sort of this year here in Australia, monthly shows. And if all the networks do it, we could have weekly shows. So that's probably one thing I would like, is that the streamers to get more involved in boxing. Forget about the mainstream, because they're a dying breed. They're done. They'll just be focusing on news, maybe some live sport, even though that's going to be outsourced more as we go. And they're going to be reality shows and just news programs. That's pretty much about it. And eventually I wouldn't be surprised if the whole mainstream news thing just goes under and it's all about streaming. So why not more get on board? So actually I'll go through a couple more comments here. What have we got? Some ideas. Forgive me if I've sort of waffled on a little bit here too, guys. What do we got? Oh, getting more big fights in the US and the UK. Look, that's going to be a hard one, of course, because Turki Alalshikh wants it in Saudi Arabia. He wants all the events. I do agree with that. I think that, I know we had the LA show earlier this year, but I would like for maybe Oscar and Eddie, maybe Oscar in the US and Eddie in the UK to say, hey, Turkey, we need to get some of these big fights over there, because the sport is, I won't say it's dying, but it's in, what would you call it? It's a little bit in limbo at the moment, because let's face it, like in the States, we need big fights there. And apart from Canelo this year, who else was there? Not many. There wasn't many big fights at all in the States, and not many in the UK either. So I think that's another thing they need to look at to keep the sport building and keep the sport alive. And that's the way we get more eyeballs on the event, because we don't want to be up at 2 or 3 in the morning watching these fights from Saudi with no atmosphere. I know the fights are great, but I would like to maybe see some more big ones go back to the US and the UK. I mean, we want to see Fury Joshua in the UK. You know, if it's Canelo and Crawford, we want to see it, you know, at the T-Mobile in Las Vegas. You know, so that's sort of where I'm going with that. What else have we got there? Yep, so I've covered the streaming. Someone says there's a book to be written here, and I agree with that. So pretty much I think I've sort of covered most of it. Yeah, no, all right. So I think I've pretty much covered most of the points I wanted to cover, and these reporters commented as well. So that's probably about it, guys. I mean, we could be here all day talking about it, but that's probably the main thing. Grassroots, I think, just keep at it. That's probably all they can do as far as the amateurs and pros goes. Promoters, maybe they could take some of that extra money they're making from these big events and maybe get behind more fighters, maybe set up training camps and that these fighters can go to and prepare, and maybe get a little bit more adventurous like what the UFC do. They take these shows all over the place. So maybe the Riyadh season might not necessarily just be Saudi, UK or US. Maybe it could be Australia. You know, maybe it could be somewhere in Europe, and put these big fights on. Maybe that's something to take these big events around the world and create massive hype. Maybe that's another one. The sanctioning bodies, not much we can do about that. That's until someone like a Turki Alalshikh just buys them and shuts them down and creates one. I don't think anything's going to change. The broadcasting going to be fascinating, so let's keep an eye on that. I think the whole way we view boxing is going to change. I've just got a feeling down the track it's all going to be streaming. As I said, the big fights will continue to be behind paywalls. Not much we can do about that. It's always sort of been the way. I just think it's more common these days, and I do understand it because the cost of putting on these events are so big these days. So it is the chicken before the egg thing. You know, it's about, you got to have money to put these events on, but also you want people to watch the events and have the sport grow. And so that's something the promoters are going to have to decide, and broadcasters. Yeah, apart from that, I just think we've got to keep at it. I personally think boxing is in a great state at the moment. But I just hope it's not a house of cards where things can fall apart very quickly. You know, for instance, Turki Alalshikh pulls out or pulls back, and all of a sudden the other promoters sort of left, they're standing out in the cold by themselves, and they haven't got the fighters, they haven't got the resource, or they haven't got the TV deals, they haven't got the fighters coming through, they haven't got established champions in their stable. They're all at war with each other because they've all chosen the side, so big fights don't get made. I mean, that's probably the fear. But anyway, overall, I think that's just, just not thinking the right way. I think overall, we're okay. But anyway, what do you think? Lots of things we could probably talk about. I'll probably waffle on about a few things that didn't need to be waffled on about. But anyway, there's so many things that we could look at, and everyone's got their own ideas. But as I said, I just think boxing is in a good state at the moment. Not just overseas, but definitely here in Australia at the moment. I think it's growing all the time. The interest is probably, actually the one thing I will say too, probably the last thing, is that we need to get more focus on the mainstream media. We need to have someone that's pushing more and getting into the mainstream media, the paper, the TV, the radio. I'm not sure what it's like overseas, but here in Australia it's non-existent. For instance, I haven't seen one thing in the Herald Sun, which is Melbourne's biggest paper, about Jai Patai's fight next week. Not one thing. So there you go. So I would maybe see the promoters get more media marketing type of people to get in, and that's probably the way. Maybe that is the way they sort of grow the sport and get those casuals involved, by getting it more in the mainstream media. I think the mainstream, as I said, the mainstream TV channels are pretty much cactus, but the media is still there. The news programs, the newspaper, and the radio. Still plenty of things that the promoters can do. So apart from that, getting eyeballs on the sport, I think we're okay. So again, what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments, and look forward to discussing it probably over the next, on the next Talking Boxing show anyway. So have a good day, guys, and we'll talk to you tomorrow.